Part 1: The Breaking Point. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon, the kind where the world feels heavy, and the sky matches your mood even if you don't know why. I was in the kitchen trying to finish dinner while Emily sat at the table coloring. She hummed a little tune, her blonde curls bouncing every time she glanced up at me to show off her latest masterpiece. Moments like this felt like magic, simple domestic magic. Then the front door opened and Mike walked in. At first, nothing seemed unusual. He dropped his keys on the counter, kicked off his shoes like he always did, and stood there for a moment, dripping rain onto the floor. But something was off. He looked at me, then quickly looked away, his face pale, his shoulders slumped. "Mike, are you okay?" I asked, setting down the spatula. "Can we talk?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I felt my stomach drop. Those 3 words, "can we talk?" had never led to anything good in the history of our relationship. Emily chirped from the table, "Hi, Daddy." He managed a weak smile and waved at her before motioning for me to follow him into the living room. I sat down on the couch, already bracing myself. He stood for a moment, pacing, his hand raking through his hair. Finally, he stopped and blurted it out. "I can't do this anymore." "Do what?" I asked, though deep down I already knew. "Us. This. I'm not happy, and I haven't been for a long time." I froze, trying to process his words. The room felt too quiet, like the whole world had paused just to hear what he'd say next. "There's someone else," he admitted, his voice cracking. My heart sank, my ears ringing as the words hit me like a freight train. "Someone else?" I whispered. "Sara," he said. "From high school. We reconnected recently and I didn't mean for this to happen, but I can't stop thinking about her. I love her." I didn't even know what to say. Love her? What about me? What about Emily? "You're leaving us for someone you haven't seen in nearly 2 decades? I managed to choke out. "This isn't about her," he said, which was the most ridiculous thing he could have said in that moment. "It's about me. About what I need." "And what about what we need?" I shot back, anger rising now to compete with the heartbreak. "What about Emily? What about your family?" "I'm sorry," he said, looking anywhere but at me. "I never wanted to hurt you. But I can't live like this anymore." Tears spilled down my cheeks, hot and unrelenting. I thought about Emily in the next room, blissfully unaware that her whole world was about to fall apart. "You're really doing this?" I asked, my voice barely audible. He nodded. "I'm sorry," he repeated, as if that made it better. Within an hour he was packing a bag. Emily peeked around the corner, her little brow furrowed. "Where are you going, Daddy?" she asked innocently. I'll be back soon," he lied, crouching down to hug her. I stood there in the doorway, watching the man I had built a life with walk out on us. The sound of the door closing behind him felt like a final nail in the coffin of our marriage. That night, after I finally got Emily to sleep, I sat on the couch in the dark, replaying every moment of the past few months, wondering how I had missed the signs. Had he been distant? Preoccupied? Was I too busy being a mom to notice that my husband was slipping away? The rain kept falling outside, steady and relentless, as if it would never stop. And for the first time in my life, I had no idea how to move forward. Part 2. Picking up the pieces. The days after Mike left were a blur. I spent most of my time trying to keep things normal for Emily, though nothing about our lives felt normal anymore. She asked constantly when Daddy was coming home, and each time I had to dodge the truth. He wasn't. Suddenly I was juggling everything alone: work, daycare, bills, groceries, while trying to hold myself together for her sake. Nights were the worst. After Emily went to bed, the silence was unbearable. I'd sit with a glass of wine, staring at photos of our family, wondering how everything had fallen apart so quickly. But Emily needed me. Slowly I started rebuilding our lives. Friends and family stepped in to help, and I learned to ask for support when I needed it. Then came the custody battle, grueling and painful, but in the end I was awarded full custody. It wasn't easy, but every day brought small victories. Emily stopped asking about Mike as often, and I started finding joy in little moments again. We were moving forward one step at a time. Part 3: Sara's Shadow. A year after Mike left, Emily and I had settled into a new routine. Life wasn't easy, but it was manageable. I had found a rhythm: work, daycare, playdates, and the occasional stolen moment for myself. I'd even dipped my toes into the dating pool again, though nothing serious. Trust didn't come easily anymore. Mike was still a sporadic presence. His visits with Emily were inconsistent, and while he claimed to want a relationship with her, his actions rarely matched his words. He would cancel plans at the last minute, forgetting the promises he'd made to his little girl. I tried to hide my frustration, but Emily wasn't oblivious. "Why doesn't Daddy come like he says he will?" she asked one evening, her big eyes staring up at me, searching for answers I didn't have. I hugged her tightly, my heart breaking. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes," I said softly. "But I'll always be here for you no matter what." It was around this time that I got the phone call. It was Mike, but his voice wasn't the confident, polished tone I'd grown to resent in the courtroom. He sounded off, defeated even. "Can we talk?" he asked hesitantly. I froze, the words hitting me like déjà vu. I wanted to say no, to hang up the phone and protect the life I was slowly rebuilding. But something in his tone tugged at my curiosity, and if I was honest, a small part of me still wanted to understand how everything had gone so wrong. We met at a coffee shop the next day. A neutral space where emotions couldn't run too high. When I walked in, I barely recognized him. Mike looked haggard, his once meticulously groomed appearance now disheveled. His eyes were bloodshot, and he fiddled nervously with the sleeve of his jacket. "Sara left me," he said abruptly, not bothering with pleasantries. I blinked, unsure of how to respond. Part of me wanted to laugh, another part wanted to scream, and yet another part felt a pang of pity for the man who had so thoroughly wrecked our lives. "I guess she wasn't everything you thought she'd be," I said, unable to keep the bitterness out of my voice. He flinched but nodded. "She wasn't," he admitted. I thought she was my second chance, but it turns out she's not the person I remembered. And he hesitated, his voice breaking. "I made the biggest mistake of my life, leaving you and Emily." I stared at him, the words swirling in my mind. A year ago, I would have given anything to hear him say that. Now it just felt empty. Too little, too late. "I don't know what you want me to say, Mike," I finally replied. "You chose her over us. You walked out on your family, and now you want— what? Sympathy." "No," he said quickly. I want to make things right. I know I can't undo what I did, but I want to try to be there for Emily. For you, if you'll let me." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "You don't get to just waltz back into our lives and pretend like nothing happened." "I know," he said, his voice desperate. "I know I don't deserve a second chance. But I'm asking for one anyway." The conversation left me reeling. For months I had dreamed of this moment, imagining all the ways I would tell him off, make him feel the pain he had caused. But now that it was here, I just felt tired. Later that night, as I tucked Emily into bed, I couldn't stop thinking about Mike's words. Could he really change? Did he deserve the chance to try? And more importantly, could I ever forgive him enough to let him back into our lives? I didn't have the answers, but one thing was clear. Sara's shadow wasn't just over Mike anymore. It was over all of us, lingering in the spaces she had left behind. Part 4: The Proposal. Mike's attempts to repair his relationship with Emily were hesitant at first. He started showing up more consistently, bringing her little gifts or taking her to the park for an hour or two. At first, I kept my distance during his visits, staying in another room or busying myself with chores. But Emily's joy at having her dad around again was undeniable, and I didn't want to stand in the way of her happiness. Over time, his visits became more frequent. He'd linger longer after dropping her off, striking up small talk or offering to help with whatever task I was working on. I could see he was trying, but I couldn't help questioning his motives. Was this about Emily? Or was he trying to weasel his way back into my life? One evening, after Emily had gone to bed, Mike stayed behind to talk. He looked nervous, fidgeting with his coffee cup as he sat across from me at the kitchen table. "You've been amazing," he started, his voice soft, "holding everything together after I left. I don't know how you did it." "I didn't have a choice," I replied bluntly. "Emily needed me." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you, and I'll never forgive myself for that. But I've realized something over the past few months. I still love you, and I love Emily. I want to come home." The words hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. For a moment, I didn't know how to react. "You what?" I asked, my voice tinged with disbelief. I want to make things right, he said, his eyes pleading. I know I can't erase what I did, but I want to prove to you that I've changed. That I can be the husband and father you both deserve. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms as I stared at him. You think you can just waltz back in here after a year? After everything you've put us through? I know it won't be easy, he admitted. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Therapy, counseling, whatever you need. Just give me a chance. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all. After all the pain, the nights spent crying myself to sleep, the endless explanations to Emily about why Daddy wasn't around, and now he wanted a second chance? What about Sara? I asked, unable to hide the bitterness in my tone. It's over, he said firmly. It's been over for months. She wasn't who I thought she was, and I should have never left you for her. I was chasing some stupid fantasy, and I lost everything that mattered because of it. His words stung, reopening wounds I thought I had started to heal. I looked down at my hands, my thoughts racing. Mike, I said finally, my voice steady. You didn't just hurt me. You hurt Emily. You abandoned her. Do you even understand what that did to her? To us? I do, he said quietly. And I hate myself for it. That's why I'm here. I want to make it right. I want to be there for her. And for you, if you'll let me. I shook my head, tears welling up in my eyes. You can't just come back and expect everything to go back to the way it was. It doesn't work like that. I know, he said, his voice breaking. But I'm asking anyway. Please just think about it. That night, after he left, I sat on the couch, staring at the empty coffee cup he'd left behind. A storm of emotions swirled inside me. Anger, sadness, confusion, and to my surprise, a glimmer of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Could people really change? Could I trust him again, knowing what he was capable of? And even if I couldn't, was it fair to deny Emily the chance to have her father back in her life? I didn't know the answers, but one thing was clear. This decision wasn't just about me. It was about the family we had once been, and the family we might still have a chance to be. Part 5, a difficult decision. The days following Mike's plea were some of the most confusing of my life. Every time I thought I'd made up my mind, doubts would creep in and pull me in the opposite direction. It felt like my heart and my head were locked in a battle, neither willing to concede. Mike's attempts to show he was serious didn't help matters. He started doing small things, dropping off groceries, offering to fix things around the house, even surprising Emily with a trip to the zoo when he knew I needed a break. She came back that day beaming, her cheeks flushed from excitement as she chattered about giraffes and ice cream. Daddy's funny, she giggled, clutching a stuffed giraffe he'd bought her. My chest tightened at her words. She had missed him so much, and now that he was here she seemed so happy. But was it enough? Could I trust that he wouldn't hurt her again? Or me? I turned to the people I trusted most for advice. My best friend Rachel didn't hold back. You're seriously thinking about taking him back after what he did to you? She asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. He abandoned you, abandoned Emily. Don't let him waltz back in like nothing happened. My mom, on the other hand, was more measured. People make mistakes, she said gently. I'm not saying you should forgive him right away, but maybe he deserves a chance to prove he's changed. For Emily's sake, if nothing else. I even talked to a therapist, hoping for some clarity. Forgiveness isn't about letting someone off the hook, she told me. It's about deciding what you're willing to accept moving forward. Ask yourself if the life you want includes him, and if you believe he can be the person you and Emily need him to be. The question haunted me. Did I even want him back? The Mike I had married, the man who had once been my best friend and partner in everything, that man was easy to love. But the Mike who had left us, who had walked out for Sara without a second thought, that man had broken something in me that felt irreparable. One night after I tucked Emily into bed, I sat on the couch and pulled out my wedding album. I hadn't looked at it since the night I'd torn up some of the photos in a fit of rage. Flipping through the pages, I saw our smiling faces, the way he'd looked at me as if I was the only person in the world. It hurt to remember how happy we'd once been. But it also reminded me of the good times, the times when he had been an amazing husband and father. Could he be that man again? I thought about Emily, about how much she adored him. She was too young to fully understand what had happened, but I knew she missed having her dad around. If there was even a chance that we could rebuild our family, didn't I owe it to her to try? But then the memories of the pain came rushing back. The nights I cried myself to sleep, wondering what I had done wrong. The countless times I had to reassure Emily that everything would be okay, even when I wasn't sure I believed it. Could I ever forgive him for putting us through that? Mike didn't push me for an answer, which I appreciated. He gave me space, focusing instead on being there for Emily. But every time he came over, every time I saw the way she lit up around him, the decision felt heavier. One day I sat Emily down and asked her how she felt about Daddy spending more time with us. "I like it," she said simply, her little hands playing with the hem of her dress. "I like when he's here. It makes me happy." Her words stayed with me long after she went to bed. She deserved to be happy. But I also knew I couldn't base my decision solely on her feelings. If Mike hurt us again, the damage could be even worse than before. In the end, I realized there was no perfect answer. Any decision I made would come with risks and uncertainties. But one thing was clear. If I decided to let Mike back into our lives, it would be on my terms. I wasn't the same person I had been when he left, and if he wanted a second chance, he would have to prove he was worthy of it. So I called him. "We need to talk," I said. When he arrived, I laid it all out for him. The pain he'd caused, the trust he'd broken, and the uphill battle he would face if he wanted to earn that trust back. "I'm not saying yes," I told him firmly. "But I'm not saying no either. You have a long way to go, Mike. And if you mess up again, there's no coming back from it." He nodded, tears in his eyes. "I understand," he said. "And I'll do whatever it takes to prove to you and Emily that I'm here for the long haul." It wasn't an answer, not really. But it was a starting point. Whether it would lead to healing or heartbreak, only time would tell. Part 6. Moving forward. Letting Mike back into our lives was like stepping onto a tightrope. I wasn't sure if I was heading toward solid ground or an inevitable fall. But I knew one thing. I wasn't the same woman he had left behind. If this was going to work, it would be on my terms. First, things were tentative. Mike started small, showing up consistently for Emily's activities. He was there for school pickups, Saturday morning soccer games, and bedtime stories. I stayed guarded, watching from the sidelines, ready to step in if he faltered. But to my surprise, he didn't. He was patient, reliable, and genuinely attentive to Emily's needs. One day, as he sat on the floor helping her build a castle out of blocks, I overheard Emily say, "I like it when you're here, Daddy." Her words were simple, but the way Mike's face softened told me how much they meant to him. While things with Emily were progressing, my own feelings were far more complicated. I had agreed to give Mike a chance, but forgiveness wasn't something I could summon on demand. Every time I saw him, I was reminded of the nights I spent crying myself to sleep, the mornings I had to face a confused and heartbroken daughter alone. To his credit, Mike didn't push me. He gave me space, but he also showed up in ways he hadn't before. He started helping around the house, fixing a leaky faucet, cooking dinner once in a while, even picking up groceries without being asked. I couldn't deny that he was trying, but I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. Then one evening, after Emily had gone to bed, Mike asked if we could talk. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," he said, his voice serious. "And I know I can't undo the hurt I caused. But I need you to know how sorry I am. Not just for leaving, but for the way I left. You didn't deserve that." His words caught me off guard. For the first time, it felt like he truly understood the depth of the pain he had caused. "I've changed, but I know that doesn't matter unless you believe it," he continued. "I'm not asking you to trust me right away, but I'm asking for the chance to earn it." I stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for any sign of insincerity. But all I saw was a man who looked as broken as I had felt a year ago. "I don't know if I can ever trust you completely," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm willing to try. For Emily's sake." It wasn't a declaration of love or forgiveness, it was a cautious step forward. And for now, that was enough. In the months that followed, we found a tentative rhythm. Mike moved closer to our neighborhood, not into the house but nearby, so he could be more present without imposing. We started having family dinners once a week, and while they were awkward at first, they slowly became something I looked forward to. But as much as I appreciated his efforts, I couldn't ignore the lingering doubts in my mind. Could someone really change so completely? Or was this just another phase? Another promise waiting to be broken? One evening, Rachel came over for wine and a long overdue catch-up. "So," she said, swirling her glass, How's Mr. Redemption Arc doing? I laughed, shaking my head. He's trying, I'll give him that. But I don't know, Ratch. Sometimes I feel like I'm waiting for him to mess up, just so I can say, I told you so. Rachel gave me a knowing look. You don't owe him anything. But if he's really showing up for you and Emily, you owe it to yourself to figure out what you want. Not for him. For you. Her words stuck with me. I realized that while I had been focusing on whether I could trust Mike again, I hadn't stopped to consider what I wanted out of this second chance. So, I started setting boundaries not just for Mike but for myself. I made it clear that while I appreciated his efforts, I needed to take things slow. He respected that, and for the first time in years I felt like we were on the same page. The turning point came one evening when Emily had a school recital. Mike and I sat side by side in the crowded auditorium, watching her sing her heart out on stage. At one point, she glanced out into the audience, her eyes lighting up when she spotted us both. Later that night, as we tucked her into bed, she whispered, "I like it when we're all together." Her words hit me harder than I expected, filling me with a mix of hope and fear. After she fell asleep, Mike turned to me. "No matter what happens between us, I'm not going anywhere," he said softly. "I promise." For the first time, I believed him. Moving forward wasn't about erasing the past. It was about learning from it. Mike and I still had a long way to go, and I didn't know if we would ever fully repair what had been broken. But I knew one thing for sure, we were both trying. And sometimes trying is the bravest thing you can do.